In the Robot Skies is the first fiction film shot entirely with pre-programmed autonomous drones. And what we're trying to do there was explore the ways that drones are being used in mass surveillance systems. The film is set in London, and at the time that we made it, the British police were starting to use drones in their surveillance systems. They were using drones to monitor council estates, like lower income housing, and to follow people as they go, and supposedly to keep us safe, but also to keep us under control in various ways. So what we wanted to do was explore what that viewpoint of us might start to look like, to explore the way that drones see. So we programmed these drones to follow a group of actors through a council estate in London. And the actors would just run their lines, and these drones would make their own decisions about how to follow them through a scene and how high to fly, how to stabilize themselves. What we're seeing in the film is literally the way that drones would see us and to visualize that. My role as a director was really just to edit the footage that the drones were capturing themselves. And the story that they're following is a story that might take place in some of these lower income social housing spaces. Here we have two teenagers, a girl and a guy, who have been put under house arrest. And they've been restricted by this network of drones from leaving their house. What the young girl does, though, is she hacks one of the drones, and like kids in an old-fashioned classroom who would write notes on bits of paper and, send it across the room to each other, she would graffiti the drone or write notes on the drone or send little presents on the drone and send it back and forth between the towers to her boyfriend trapped in the tower opposite. So this infrastructure, this system of technology that was designed to keep them apart, they can hack them and use them as a way to fall in love. So really it's a story about how drones are cultural objects. They're not these objective eyes in the sky, but they're things that are the manifestations and the products of our own system of values. If we can, the same drone technology can be used to spy on us, to peer in a teenage girl's bedroom when she's getting changed, or to bring us together, to deliver vaccines to indigenous communities out in the distant rainforest. No technology is neutral. It's all a projection or an extension of ourselves. And what this film is trying to do is to bring drones down to a scale that we can start to understand them and connect with them and imagine the implications, both good and bad, both wondrous and really scary, so that we can think about whether these technologies are things we want to invest in or not. At the time that we made the film, it was possible to go into a toy shop and for a couple of $100 buy a 4K resolution camera drone and learn to fly it like a professional in half an hour. Drones are at this really interesting point where there are now more civilian drones in the air than there are military drones. And that's kind of the point at which we like to operate in our work, to engage technologies at the point in which they're just about to become accessible and democratized, because that's when the most interesting stories occur. That's when we see technologies being misused or reinterpreted in ways that they weren't intended. And that's really what In the Robot Skies as a film is about. So New City is a collection of imaginary skylines of future cities. And each skyline is created through what we call photo bashing, which is a process in visual effects to create these digital backgrounds against which you see kind of superheroes or spaceships and alien invasions and so on. But we traveled around the world and we collected a whole series of photographs from places and contexts that are going to play key roles in shaping our future. And we collected those images and we kind of collaged together these future skylines from those images of real places, essentially projecting and exaggerating these trends into the future. So our processes of world building is one of exaggeration, I think. All of our fictional future projects start in documentary work. We get on a plane and we travel to a particular place, like China. China is a country that for the last 20 years has really been building our future. All of the technologies we own, the clothes we wear, all of the infrastructure and systems that produce the modern world begins its life in a factory or a mine in the Chinese landscape. And what we've done with New City is travel through China, take a whole series of photographs, collage them together into these future cities, really using the raw material of this place to make these imaginary futures in the same way that we use the raw material of this same place to make all the technologies that are casting and shaping those futures. So it's this process of creating these worlds from the extrapolation of the present. Because really what we're talking about with New City is this idea that the future is really just a way of looking back in on the present in new ways. You know, none of the futures that you're going to see in the exhibition predictions. They're not about trying to anticipate and predict what will happen next, but rather they're talking about the landscape of possibilities that could arrive as a means to inform us and help us to make decisions in the present. Science fiction is never about the future. It's always about the present moment. You know, a classic like George Orwell's 1984 that we think was a great work of fiction and speculation because it seems like we're all living in a Big Brother Orwellian future isn't really the point. The fact that he got it right is more a sign that we didn't listen. You know, 1984 is about 1948, the year in which it was made, where George Orwell saw certain trends happening in politics that were really scary. So he wrote a story about what those trends might mean in the future, and we just didn't follow his instructions in a way, and the fact that we're there is a sign of the failure of the book as opposed to its success. In the same way, the landscapes of New City are really about looking at present conditions like offshore cities, like special economic zones, like, you know, technology manufacturing landscapes, like the landscapes of e-commerce that are being set in motion through Amazon fulfillment centers. And it's about looking at those existing conditions, documenting them, and then extrapolating them into the futures that they're setting in motion. So Where the City Can't See is the first fiction film shot entirely using laser scanning technology, what we call LiDAR, which is a cross between laser scanning and radar. And LiDAR technology, laser scanning technology, is one of the key systems that things like driverless cars or drones use to navigate. Basically, they need to create a really precise map of the world in order for a car to understand where's the road, where's a building, where's a tree, where's a person, where's a van, and how to navigate through all those systems. And in a way, what we're trying to talk about with this film is the idea that now the dominant systems that we're beginning to design our cities for are not human. They're autonomous machines. It's now more critical to design a streetscape based on how a driverless car might map and understand that streetscape than it is to design it around our own patterns of occupation and inhabitation. Cities have always emerged and grown based around the dominant mode of transport in the day. You know, whether it was a city based around how horses move, a city like a US city based around the automobile, or a city based around trains, or medieval cities based around the distance and time it takes for us to walk somewhere. Now our future cities are going to be designed around driverless cars. So Where the City Can't See is a film shot entirely from the perspective of a driverless vehicle to understand how they see the city and how they see us. Laser scanning technology that they use to navigate isn't perfect. It's based on line of sight technology. The way that the laser scanners work is that a mirror spins around really, really fast. A laser hits that mirror and then shoots out and scatters against the world. It reflects off a surface, bounces back to a sensor, and creates what we call a point cloud, which is a really precise, accurate map of the world. And that's essentially what you see in the film Where the City Can't See, is these point clouds, these amazing ephemeral clouds of dots which is exactly what the driverless car is seeing. But that system isn't precise. It has shadows and glitches and distortions. If you can change the way that a laser hits a surface and reflects back, then you can create a ghost or a shadow. So that film is exploring the ways that people can create their own costumes, their own systems of camouflage to disappear in the eyes of these machines. Where the City Can't See is really about a group of teenagers, one night in a future city of Detroit, traveling around in a driverless taxi, going to an underground rave party. And it's trying to explore in a city where machines see everything with millimeter precision, where are the gaps and the cracks where you can be young and have fun and listen to music and dance and have sex and drink and do all the things that young people do. And really what we're trying to say with that work is that those gaps no longer exist out on the industrial edges of a city or in an abandoned house party or in a warehouse party, but rather they exist in the gaps between how machines see. So the teenagers in the film wear LiDAR camouflage clothing that is made from iridescent silks and reflective fabrics that are designed to reflect the laser light and scatter it and shatter it, so that when they move, they become these glitches and distortions in the data set. They become these strange kinds of ghosts. And they move with a vocabulary of movement that we designed with the choreographer Jacob Jonas. And these scans are being analyzed constantly with algorithms to determine and to map the human body, whether it's the features of our face or the proportions of our arms and legs. The way we move is just as individual as a fingerprint. And we created a system of movement that would distort the body and disguise the body from these algorithms. So they dance with this new system of movement, they wear these new clothes. And what we see is that the cultures of the future, the fashion of the future is no longer based around natural seasons or trends from Paris, but it's based around the next generation of the algorithm or how machines see. So really what we're trying to do is explore the cultural implications of the technologies of new surveillance systems and driverless cars. So the great endeavor is a film, a speculation on what will become humanity's largest ever construction project, which is a project to create a planetary scale network of carbon sequestration machines. At the moment, when we talk about climate change, we focus a lot on future emissions, like limiting future emissions, transitioning from fossil fuels to electric energy, to solar, to wind, and so on. But what we don't really talk about is that all of the emissions targets that global nations have all agreed on, that we're not really going to hit anyway, but even so, those agreements are based on limiting future emissions, but also pulling out of the air a lot of the carbon that we've already put in the air throughout the history of industrialization. And that process of taking carbon out of the air that we've already put there is called carbon sequestration. Essentially, sucking the air into machines, we're using big fans, scrubbing the air, filtering it, sucking the carbon off of that air, and then pushing that carbon down into the ground to be stored permanently in rock. And there's very early tests and prototypes of this technology that's happening now around the world. What we need to do in our generation is suck carbon out of the air at massive, massive scale. The project began by looking at the scale of carbon sequestration that's actually needed in order for humanity to not go extinct. And what all of our researchers and collaborators on the project have told us is that in our lifetime, we need to create an infrastructure of carbon sequestration, carbon capture, that is equivalent to the current oil and gas industry. And if you think about that, that means every oil rig, every pipeline, every gas plant that currently exists on the Earth, we need to build again to do the reverse, to put all that carbon back into the Earth, not to pull it out and use it. And this project really constitutes our generation's moon landing. You know, the most ambitious planetary scale collaboration ever before attempted is not just something we might hope to do, but it's something we literally need to do in order to not go extinct. The Great Endeavor, I hope, is an optimistic project. It's a film that visualizes the massive labor and workforce that would be involved in building this planetary scale carbon capture machine, to try and get us excited about doing it. In the same way that Kennedy's speech about the moon landing was supposed to inspire a generation of scientists to do this impossible thing, the Great Endeavor is trying to inspire us to get together and build this machine, to make these technologies, which currently only exist at very small scales, viable at the scale of the planet. Part of the film is a new original score, an original song developed in collaboration with the electronic musician Lyra Pramuk. And what our brief to Lyra was about was to imagine a workers' song for the entire planet. Workers' songs were traditionally sung by people in the field, partly to create a rhythm that would keep their bodies in synchronization as they're harvesting wheat. But it soon became a way that workers would express their solidarity together. They would sing together these songs. Our brief was to create a workers' song for 1 billion people. A song that we could sing together as a planet as we work together to build this giant machine. Lyra works with artificial intelligence software, manipulating and multiplying her voice. And essentially we wanted to explore what a chorus of 1 million workers might sound like, and in a way that's what you will hear when you watch the film. And it's indicative of the larger ambitions of the project. The Great Endeavor is to try and get us excited about the prospects of building this machine, not to scare us about the dangers of impending climate doom, but to encourage us to all work together, to inspire us to come together to build this necessary machine to save the planet. Planet City is a film, a VR experience, a set of costumes, a speculation based around what it might mean to live in the future sustainably as a planetary culture. Planet City as a film is based on the theories of a seminal biologist called Edward O. Wilson. And he had a plan he called Half Earth, which is a plan to stave off mass extinction by devoting half the surface of the Earth completely to nature and restricting human development to the other half of the planet that would remain, as a way of consolidating human activity to one place and relieve the pressure on the rest of the ecosystem for the remainder of the planet. And a lot of biologists and ecologists have been focusing on that 50% of the planet that we might leave behind. But trained as an architect, I'm interested in the massive consolidation of our existing cities that would be required to retreat to that remaining 50%. And that's really where the speculation, the thought experiment of Planet City began. What would it mean to consolidate and shrink human development? And as we started to design it with the whole series of economists and urbanists and political theorists, sociologists, ecologists, environmentalists, and technologists, we realized that actually at the scale of the densest cities that currently already exist, you could put 10 billion people, the projected population of the world in 2050, into a single city the size of about a single US state. What would be 0.02% of the planet as opposed to E.O. Wilson's 50%. So the most extreme example of this process of densification and consolidation is what we see in Planet City. And it's really a way of prototyping the necessary lifestyle changes that we might need to make in order to not go extinct. The idea that we can continue growing as we are and consuming at the rate that we are is a total impossibility. the world's population is exploding, and there simply isn't enough room or resources to sustain us. So we need to make a choice. Either we choose to not have children and to not grow and to massively shrink to about 3 billion people, which might still be sustainable in the future, or we have to densify. The idea that we all might live in a single family home with a front yard and a backyard, a 3-car garage, 4 bathrooms, 3 bedrooms, it's just not possible at the scale of 10 billion people. Planet City prototypes what a scale of city could look like for 10 billion people, where we see nested through the city sites of food production, farms, fruit orchards, ecosystems of animals, birds and insects, all nested tightly together with communities and people. It's a very vertical city, powered entirely from renewable energy systems, from solar farms, from wind farms. It's a city built entirely from existing material that's already been extracted from the earth. We recycle existing cities and bring that material back together again in new constellations to make Planet City. So no new resources are consumed to build this city. No fossil fuels are consumed to power it. Solar power and wind power is used to pump water into high altitude holding lakes and canals in the city's upper floors. And then at areas of peak demand or times of peak demand like nighttime, then we release the water of those canals, and the potential energy stored in them is what powers the city. So it's this extraordinary organic system that sustains 10 billion people at a scale and a density that allows the rest of the planet to be returned to a global scale wilderness. So The Emissary is a film, a speculation that presents what will become humanity's last ever object. If all of the crises that we're currently faced with, radical climate change, economic collapse, all come to fruition and we don't solve any of those problems, then Emissary is the last record of human life in the universe. It's an object that we make that is a memorial to ourselves. It's inspired by the gold record on the Voyager probe, which was this message that we would use to send out into the world to say, hey, here we are, this is what we look like, this is what we sound like, this is where we are, and it's still hurtling through space. It's now left our solar system and is traveling out into these alien worlds, into the universe somewhere to be found. We're a very different culture than we were in the 70s when the Voyager gold record was launched. Emissary is a new kind of message. It's not a message speaking to other distant alien worlds, but rather it's just a message for ourselves to say that we were here. Perhaps, in the context of climate change and human extinction, this is the last record that we were around. No matter what happens, Emissary will still exist. And it's both a really horrific project, a really scary project, a desperately sad project, but at the same time, I think there's a little bit of hope there that we'll always have this legacy drifting out in the universe somewhere as a record of human existence. So the design for Emissary was entirely based around the material technologies that could be involved in making an object that would last for eternity. So Emissary is designed in collaboration with NASA JPL, material technologists, mission planners that are based there. And our brief to them was, what would it take to design an object we could launch into the universe that would last for eternity? So it's based on a material that won't corrode across time. It's based on a structural system with extraordinary redundancy so that even if it gets hit by micrometeors or anything like that, it will not lose its structural integrity and it will maintain its path through the universe. The mission plan is that we point it at the most empty parts of the sky. And we're not sending it to another planet, but rather the idea is that this object will just continue traveling through the universe for all of time as a record of who we were. There's no scientific instrumentation on it. There's no military instrumentation on it, which most of our satellites and craft that we launch into the universe contain. Its only purpose is to be a record of ourselves.